and you find it helpful, please turn it to Acts chapter 27. This is where we'll be spending our time. Throughout this 30-year period with Paul, you've seen God working out his purposes in this one life. And when he works his purposes out, Paul is involved with other people. And so God's purposes work out, and other people are just blindly beneficiaries of this working out. That the protection that Paul has, all of the things that God has done to bring Paul to this point in his life, these other people who are around Paul have benefited from it. So you have to wonder, I think, what does that mean when God works his purposes out in our lives? Let's take a look at this text. I'll begin reading in verse 39 of chapter 27. When daylight came, none of us could see the land, but we did see a bay with a sandy beach, where we decided to run the ship aground if we could. Cutting loose the anchors, we left them in the sea, and at the same time untied all the ropes that held the rudders. Then we hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground, and the bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern of the ship was being broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. And so the soldiers planned to kill all of the prisoners to prevent any of them from escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard and to get to the land, and the rest were there to get there on planks or pieces of the ship that were floating in the water. And in this way, everyone reached the land in safety. Once they had arrived on the shore of Malta, they found that this is what the island was called. And the islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us because it was raining and it was cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he did, when he went to put it on the fire, a viper, driven by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging off of Paul's hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, because now justice has found him and is not going to allow him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and had no ill effect from the bite. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing that nothing happened to him, they changed their minds and thought that he was a god. So they see salvation in front of them. They're in the water. They all these days and days and days, they've been floating in the middle of the Mediterranean. No chance of land. The winds are blowing them in a circular fashion, so they don't even know where they are. And when they finally see this land and they start near it, they run aground. And this is an interesting detail that Luke gives us here. He talks about where the two seas came together, that there were two ocean currents there, and it had piled sand up, just like you will see anytime when two currents come together. The sandbar was very shallow, and so the ship stuck far off of shore, so they weren't going to make it to the beach that they were trying to make it to. And the Romans, they had a law for any Roman soldier. If you had a prisoner and something happened, say this prisoner was condemned for crucifixion, or this prisoner was condemned to be put to death by the sword, or to be imprisoned, whatever the prisoner was going to suffer as a punishment, if you lost that prisoner, you suffered it. So the guards are saying, well, we know what to do. We'll just kill everybody, and then nobody suffers anything, and we get on the land, and everything's fine, and we go back and report to the regiment commander that we just had to kill all the prisoners so that none would escape. Tell them the story about what happened. What is so significant about this is that you see that Paul's life, his very life, is always on the edge of being lost. Throughout all of this, he could drown. The soldiers could kill him. He could have drowned when they were drifting at sea. They all could have been lost. They could have been killed when the crowd first came upon him on the temple porch in Antonia's castle when he was arrested the very first time. At any time in this, he could have been killed. There was a plot to kill him when they transported him as a prisoner. His life has just been right on the edges for the entire time of this narrative. This centurion seems like a pretty wise guy. I'm going to say, and he seems compassionate. I'm going to wonder about these Romans. I wonder if this guy, this centurion leader, has somehow been affected by Paul. I can't see how they couldn't. Everything Paul has said has come to pass. Paul has predicted all kinds of things on this trip, and every one of them has come to pass. You have to wonder. So they hoist this mainsail. They try to run the ship aground. The winds are favorable for the first time in 2 weeks that they can make the land. And you could look at that and say, well, isn't that great that the wind turned our way? I would look at it and say, isn't it great that God decided to help us out? Man, your worldview just makes a lot of difference in how you view everything that comes into your life or into mine. But you can see that God is superintending all of this, that none of this is accidental, none of this is just random. Now, did choices play into it? I mean, did God engineer it that there should be the storm? Did God engineer it that they should get into the boats and travel when they knew better? No, I don't think so at all. But God has never, with all of the circumstances that are going on, taken his hand off of Paul. And these men are all benefiting from it. They're all benefiting. God's will has been working out. And I could just imagine how these guys felt when they got to this point after being all those days floating around and around in the Mediterranean. They see land, they see salvation in front of them. How that feels when suddenly everything's been really bad for a long time and now it's going to work out. I remember just this past week, we were working in a bathroom. That's our project right now. And beautiful bathroom, everything worked great. We have had no real difficulties with it. We've solved all of our problems. We're done. We're ready to pull. We've packed up. We've left. And so I sit down at my desk on Monday morning. I was going to get the bill together. It's a good thing I didn't. I call them up and I say, they had some towel bars and stuff. They said, these are extra things, but could you put them in for us? We said, sure. So I called them up. I said, did your towel bars come in? And they said, yeah, they did, but there's a problem. And as soon as I hear that, hot sweat just pours into my face. I'm thinking, oh man, I've got to go back over there. I've got to fix something now. Who knows what it's going to be? I hope it's something simple. I hope something just unscrewed itself or came loose. The shower won't drain. I thought, oh no. I mean, I didn't even, all it is a straight piece of pipe about this long going right back down to where it came from. All we did was move the drain closer to the middle of the shower. Didn't change it at all. So we get over there and we'd look around and we'd start messing with it. We were over there for 8 hours getting this drain unclogged. And in the last half an hour, I can't express to you how giddy I got when it started to run again. It's running like it's supposed to. All the water spigots are turned on wide open and the water's flowing out. I'm so happy. That's how they felt at that moment. There's the land. Wow, we've been suffering all these weeks and now we can get back to dry ground. We're so happy. I tell you, one of the aspects of living in this fallen world, I don't know if this is part of your personality, but it is part of mine. I get happy like anybody when things go well, but when things start to look unhappy in front of me, I start thinking in a kind of a what-if sort of way of thinking. Now that's probably the most destructive way of thinking you can possibly enter into. What if I had done X? What if I had not done X? I grew up in the household of an alcoholic. And my mother told me that his alcoholism, his depression, whatever it was that was driving him to drink the way that he did, was from what if thinking. He saw his life going in a certain trajectory. Then he married my mom and children came along and now his life took a turn. And that what if for him was big. That was a huge feature of who he was that caused him to drink in the way that he did. The problem is that we start to see our lives as having meaning in what we do. Not in who we are, but in what we do. And we start to find little ways that we can live that will bring meaning to our lives and make our lives more enjoyable, or make us feel as though it matters that we're even here. The trouble is we can start to find those little things and latch onto them as real meaning when really they're not. They're just temporary things. We can spend ourselves trying to find that meaning. And that's what my father did. He had a certain design for his life that his life didn't achieve. And so the meaning that he had for his life went away. And so he found meaning in something else, and that was alcohol. Something to dampen that pain of realizing that I've not become who I thought I would be. But I tell you, when you walk with God, I can imagine Paul's thinking, what if we had not sailed? We wouldn't be out here floating in the Mediterranean. We'd be back at Fair Havens having a sandwich or whatever they ate in a warm, dry place. And we would be waiting for the winter to pass, and then we would sail when the winds are nice and the weather's nice, it's not cold. What if we had not sailed? What if we had done this? What if I had not been on the road to Damascus to arrest Christians and met the Lord? My life would have been, I would have had a career as a Pharisee. All of these elements. But you see, God's got a bigger purpose for every life in this room. Every one of us has a bigger purpose. A purpose that goes way beyond some kind of little purposes that we might find, like a job or whatever it is. Far beyond it. I remember a friend of mine who was involved in a parachurch. Parachurch ministries are those things that are outside the congregational setting, like Campus Crusade or a band or whatever it is, or like these quartets we listened to this morning. And they were frustrated because their purpose in living, which was wrapped up in this parachurch work, they felt as though they were only doing it halfway. That is so sad, so debilitating to come to a place in our life where we see our life's purpose, whatever that thing is that we thought we were supposed to be doing, not come to fruition, and then to suddenly realize that we've invested so heavily in that one purpose that nothing else really matters to us anymore. There's a lot of people who are very depressed and very down on their lives because that's how they think. I have a germ of that within myself to some degree. I remember reading about Solomon. Solomon is a good cure for that kind of thinking. Solomon had all the wealth and everything he needed to try anything he wanted. You go back and read Ecclesiastes. I tried everything under the sun. Anything I wanted. If I wanted women, I tried all the women I could. 1,000 wives. I mean, good grief. He tried that. He tried wealth. He tried drink. He tried building things. He tried everything. I have a philosopher that I like to read, and he talks about this, and he says, you know, he relates to it in the way of a man. So you'll have to, if you're a woman, you have to plug yourself into this in a different way. Since I'm not a woman, I don't know what that feels like. He says, wine and women and mistresses and money and cars and boats and big houses and all the possessions, he said, people keep putting that car on the road and it just won't go. And he's right. It gets tried over and over and over again. Becky and I watched this documentary about Amy Winehouse. I don't know if any of you know who Amy Winehouse is. Man, she was a talented person. I mean, she was doing the kind of music that people did in the 40s and 50s. Some of the really, really good jazz singers like Ella Fitzgerald. She was doing that kind of music as a 16-year-old. And the record companies got a hold of her, and she started to become famous. And by the time she was 24 years old, she's world famous. And at 28, she's dead. Because all of that she thought she really, really wanted did not satisfy whatever the itch was she was trying to scratch. And she wound up dead. I'll tell you, we're still trying. We are still trying to put that car on the road, as that philosopher says, and it just won't go. There's got to be something else. Some people are looking for endless novelty. Well, Paul's life looks pretty filled with novelty to me. I mean, one day to the next, he doesn't know what's going to happen. But some people, in their life with God, as they think about life walking in this world with God, they think about it in terms of the excitement aspect of it. I don't know how it feels to you, but I can tell you when I was traveling, when I was sitting in a congregational setting just like you are today, and I would hear somebody from the front come up and talk about how exciting their life with the Lord was, I just thought to myself, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? I had a distorted perspective of what walking with God is supposed to be. And I was expecting the show. I was expecting something to be so incredible every time I prayed or every time I got together with other people or was in the congregational setting, that it was almost like a disappointment to me. And I'll tell you, that is a dangerous perspective to have. You go back and you read Galatians chapter 1 and you see Paul writing to a congregation that has become bored with their walk with the Lord. When the show no longer entertains, boredom enters in. And when boredom enters in, it starts to kill that relationship with God. I think boredom's a symptom. I don't think boredom is the problem. It's a symptom of something else. Boredom with congregational life, boredom with our life with God, is that either we don't have a relationship at all with Him or it's dead. That's the only way that we can become bored with God. Either we don't know Him or the relationship has died. How can we be bored with the Maker of the universe as a companion walking with us through every minute of every day? Think about, there are biblical characters where you see this happening. I think about Elijah. Remember, there's a guy who saw some stuff. He goes to Mount Carmel, he meets with 450 prophets of Baal, and he puts a kind of a wager on, and he says, okay guys, either Baal is God or Yahweh is God. We're going to find out today. So let's build 2 altars. They build the altars, they sacrifice the animals on the altars, and he says, whichever one of these 2 gods answers by fire, he is God. So the prophets of Baal, 450 of them, you'd figure, that's one of the things about prayer we think about. If we can get a lot of people praying, it makes a lot of difference. One person praying makes a lot of difference. So they get 450 prophets. They dance for 3/4 of a day, cut themselves, screaming, crying out to Baal. Nothing. Elijah gets so frustrated with them, he becomes sarcastic. He says, I wonder if he's in the toilet. That's what the Hebrew means. I wonder if he's in the toilet. Maybe he just can't hear you. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he went on a vacation. And then after all that time, they give up, and Elijah just says, God, hear me. And the fire comes down, and that altar, not only was there an altar covered with wood, but they had poured water on it until the water was running around in a moat around the altar. The fire of God sucks up everything, dries up all the water, burns up the entire altar. And then Elijah runs away. What in the world is going on? He runs away from Mount Carmel and hides in a cave and wishes for death. What's the matter with Elijah? It's just the way of human nature. We can see something like that, and we think if we could just see that, then we would be happy. We would be excited about God. We would want to spend our time with Him. But it doesn't last. It didn't last for Elijah. It doesn't last for any of us. The same way. Hannah was depressed. She couldn't have a kid. What did she do? She prayed. And God brought Samuel. Boredom is a sign of 2 things. When we find ourselves bored with God or bored with the things of God, 2 things. 1, we're self-centered and we're living for ourselves. 2, we have no deep relationship with Him. I don't think it's possible to have a deep relationship with God and be bored with Him. I just don't think it's possible. Every day, God gives us a new day. Every day. He gives us a new minute. When you and I do something sinful, God says, all you got to do is come to me and ask, and I'll forgive you. And I'll make your life new, starting all over again, just like nothing had ever occurred. I can't imagine what could compel Paul to do what he's doing here. Think about it for a minute. Think about all you know about salvation, all you know about Christianity. Think about it just for a minute, and then think of yourself as Paul. Would you feel compelled, as Paul feels compelled, to take that message? There's something else there. There is something that Paul has tapped into that for whatever reason we just aren't. I want it, don't you? I want whatever it is that Paul has tapped into, I want to tap into. I think what he's tapped into is that he knows that no matter what he does in his life has meaning because God is with him in it. The meaning of the gospel, the meaning of the message, the meaning of all that is all secondary. What matters to Paul is he's walking with the Lord every day. That's what matters to Paul. That's why the message for Paul, he can't contain it. He is so filled up with God and the forgiveness that God has given that he can't contain it. I mean, you're talking about a murderer who now is taking the gospel of the forgiveness he has found to other people. I want to read for you in closing today a poem. This poem is so powerful. It's by a woman by the name of Kathleen Wheeler. And she wrote this as an elementary school teacher. And as a Christian, but as an elementary school teacher. And I think it's one of the most beautiful poems I've ever heard. She says, speaking of one of the students, he came to my desk with a quivering lip. The lesson was done. Dear teacher, I want a new paper. I have spoiled this one. I took the old leaf, the old paper, all stained and blotted. I gave him a new one, all unspotted, and into his sad face I smiled. Do better now, my child. I went to the throne with a quivering lip, she says. The old year was done. Father, do you have a new life for me? I have spoiled this one. He took the old life, all stained and blotted, and gave me a new one, all unspotted. And into my sad heart, he cried, do better now, my child. I'll tell you, that is exactly God's heart for every person in this room, no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, no matter what time we've wasted up to this very second. God is there to say, here's a new one. Here's a new second. Start today. That's what motivated Paul, was that idea, that truth that God gave Paul a new life. He gives us the same. I don't know where everybody